The bitter aroma of overpriced coffee and the constant hum of conversation filled Cafe Nero as I hunched over my laptop, surrounded by financial textbooks and scattered notes. My economics final was in 3 days, and the complex derivatives formulas seemed to blur together on the screen. I rubbed my tired eyes, pushing my wire-rimmed glasses up my nose for the 100th time today. "Another macchiato, hun?" asked Sarah, the barista who'd become familiar with my daily routine over the past semester. "Please," I mumbled, not looking up from my screen. The caffeine was probably the only thing keeping me functional at this point. Between my part-time job at the university library, my full course load, and trying to finish my senior thesis on organized crime's impact on legitimate businesses, I was running on fumes. The cafe was unusually busy for a Tuesday afternoon. I'd claimed my usual corner table by the window, where the natural light was best for reading, and the ambient noise helped me focus. It was my sanctuary, the one place where I could disappear into my studies without the constant reminder of my cramped studio apartment or my mounting student loans. As Sarah placed the fresh macchiato beside my laptop, I noticed her glance nervously toward the back section of the cafe. Following her gaze, I saw what had caught her attention. 3 men in expensive suits occupied a large corner booth, their conversation intense and hushed. Even from across the room, there was something different about them. The way they sat with their backs to walls, how their eyes constantly scanned the room, the subtle bulges beneath their tailored jackets. But it was the man in the center who made my breath catch. Dark hair perfectly styled, strong jawline, and eyes the color of storm clouds. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe late 20s, with the kind of dangerous attractiveness that belonged in movies rather than real life. Even seated, I could tell he was tall and powerfully built, his charcoal suit doing nothing to hide the strength beneath. Logan Castellano. I'd seen his photo in the business section of newspapers, though the black and white prints hadn't done justice to his commanding presence. My thesis research had led me deep into the murky world where legitimate business intersected with organized crime, and the Castellano name appeared frequently in my notes. Officially, he ran a chain of upscale casinos and restaurants. Unofficially, according to my research, his influence extended far beyond the gaming tables. I should have looked away, should have focused on my derivatives homework. Instead, I found myself observing the dynamics at their table. The man to Logan's left, with prematurely gray hair and nervous energy, kept checking his phone. The other, broader and older, had the bearing of someone accustomed to violence, but Logan himself seemed completely calm, even as their conversation grew more animated. My phone buzzed with a text from my roommate, Emma. "How's the studying going? You've been at that cafe for like 6 hours." I typed back quickly, making progress. Home later tonight. The lie came easily. I wasn't making much progress at all. Between my fascination with the real-life subject of my research sitting 20 feet away and my exhaustion, I'd read the same paragraph about regulatory compliance 3 times without absorbing a word. The afternoon light was fading when I noticed the shift in atmosphere. The casual chatter of other patrons seemed to quiet, though I couldn't pinpoint why. Logan and his companions had been joined by 2 more men, these ones different. Where Logan's associates carried themselves with confident authority, these newcomers radiated barely contained menace. Their suits were expensive, but ill-fitting, and they spoke with accents I couldn't quite place. I tried to refocus on my laptop screen, but the tension in the air was palpable. Even other customers seemed to sense it, conversations dropping to whispers or stopping altogether. Sarah behind the counter kept glancing toward the back booth, her usual smile replaced by obvious anxiety. The meeting was clearly business, and from the body language I could observe, it wasn't going well. Logan maintained his composed exterior, but I'd spent enough time studying behavioral economics to recognize micro-expressions of stress. The slight tightening around his eyes, the way his fingers drummed silently against the table, subtle tells that suggested this was more than a routine discussion. One of the newcomers pulled out a tablet, sliding it across the table to Logan. Even from my distance, I could see him studying whatever was displayed, his expression growing darker. The gray-haired man beside him leaned in, pointing at something on the screen, but Logan raised a hand to silence him. My economics background made me naturally curious about business negotiations, especially when they involved the kind of figures I suspected were being discussed. The numbers running through my head as I pretended to work were staggering. The legitimate casino business alone was worth hundreds of millions, and that was just what appeared in public records. The conversation continued for another hour, voices occasionally rising before being quickly hushed. I found myself taking notes in the margins of my textbook, not about economic theory, but about the behavioral patterns I was observing. It was like watching a masterclass in high-stakes negotiation, though I could only guess at the subject matter. As the sun set completely, the cafe began to empty. Sarah approached my table with obvious reluctance. "We're closing in 30 minutes, Lily. I hate to rush you, but..." "Of course," I said, beginning to pack my things. "Sorry, I lost track of time." She glanced toward the back booth again. "Those men, they're not our usual customers." I followed her gaze. The meeting was still ongoing, but something had changed. Logan's calm facade was beginning to crack, and the gray-haired man beside him looked genuinely distressed. One of the foreign visitors was speaking rapidly, gesturing emphatically at the tablet. "I should go," I said, closing my laptop. But as I stood to leave, I caught a fragment of conversation that made me freeze. The accented voice was saying something about percentage adjustments and compound interest modifications. My brain, trained to recognize financial terminology even in foreign accents, immediately began processing what I'd heard. They were discussing loan terms, complex ones, involving calculations that seemed deliberately confusing. From my position gathering my books, I could see Logan studying the tablet with obvious frustration, while the gray-haired man, his advisor, presumably, shook his head in apparent confusion. That's when I realized what was happening. Someone was trying to cheat Logan Castellano using financial instruments too complex for his advisors to quickly verify. The audacity was stunning, but more concerning was the fact that it might actually work. I should have left. Should have walked out of the cafe and never looked back. This wasn't my world, wasn't my business. These were dangerous people engaged in activities I could only imagine. Instead, I found myself taking a step closer to their table, my economics textbook still clutched in my arms. Because despite everything I knew about who Logan Castellano was and what he represented, what I was witnessing was simply wrong. And I couldn't stand by and watch someone, even someone like him, be cheated through deliberately obfuscated mathematics. The next words out of my mouth would change everything. "Excuse me," I said, my voice surprisingly steady despite my racing heart. "I couldn't help but notice you're having trouble with those compound interest calculations." The silence that followed was deafening. Every head at the table turned toward me, and I suddenly became acutely aware of how I must look. A young woman in jeans and an oversized sweater, clutching textbooks like a shield, interrupting what was obviously a private business meeting. Logan's storm-gray eyes met mine, and for a moment, I saw genuine surprise flicker across his features. The foreign visitors looked between confused and offended, while the gray-haired man beside Logan opened his mouth as if to dismiss me entirely. "Miss," the gray-haired man began, his tone patronizing, "this is a private—" "Marcus," Logan said quietly, raising a hand. His gaze never left mine. "Let her speak." One of the foreign men, the one who'd been doing most of the talking, laughed dismissively. "You bring child to business meeting now, Castellano? This is not game." The insult sent heat rushing to my cheeks, but I forced myself to remain calm. "Actually, I'm a senior economics major specializing in financial derivatives and risk assessment, and what you're proposing isn't just complicated, it's deliberately deceptive." The laughter died immediately. The second foreign visitor leaned forward, his expression darkening. "What you say." I took a deep breath, committing fully to what might be the stupidest decision of my life. May I? I gestured toward the tablet they'd been studying. Logan studied me for a long moment, then slid the device across the table. By all means. My hands were steady as I picked up the tablet, though my pulse was thundering in my ears. The screen displayed what appeared to be a loan restructuring agreement, but as I scanned the terms, my worst suspicions were confirmed. Hidden within dense paragraphs of financial jargon were clauses that would effectively triple the interest rate over time through a series of compounding mechanisms. "This is clever," I said, looking up at the foreign visitors. "You've buried the real terms deep in subsection 12, paragraph 4. The initial rate of 8% looks reasonable, but these escalation clauses would push the effective rate to over 24% within 18 months. The man who'd been leading their presentation shifted uncomfortably. "Is standard practice? Market rates fluctuate." "No," I said firmly, scrolling to another section. "This isn't market fluctuation. Look here. You've structured the payment schedule so that the principal never decreases for the first 2 years, despite regular payments. Every payment goes toward interest that's being calculated using this hidden compound formula." Logan was now studying the screen over my shoulder, close enough that I could smell his expensive cologne. "Explain it simply." "They're not offering you a $50 million loan," I said, meeting his eyes. "They're offering you a $50 million loan that will cost you approximately $130 million to repay, assuming you can even meet the payment schedule they've designed to be mathematically impossible to maintain." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Marcus, the gray-haired advisor, had gone pale. "Lily. May I call you Lily? Are you certain about these calculations?" I pulled out my phone and quickly ran the numbers through a financial calculator app, then showed them the screen. "Completely certain. It's sophisticated, but it's also fraud." One of the foreign visitors stood abruptly, his hand moving toward his jacket. "You make serious accusation, little girl." Before I could react, Logan was on his feet as well, positioning himself slightly between me and the threatening man. "Dimitri," he said, his voice carrying a warning that made the hair on my arms stand up. "Sit down." The man, Dimitri, hesitated, clearly torn between anger and self-preservation. After a tense moment, he slowly resumed his seat, but his glare remained fixed on me. "Continue," Logan said, settling back into his chair but remaining alert. I scrolled through more of the document, my confidence growing as I spotted additional irregularities. There's more. These insurance clauses they've included, they're designed to void automatically if certain economic indicators shift, indicators they can potentially manipulate through their other business interests. Marcus leaned in, squinting at the screen. "How did you see all this so quickly?" "Practice," I said simply. "I've been studying predatory lending practices for my thesis. This document uses every trick in the book, just dressed up in more sophisticated language." Logan took the tablet back, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was dangerously quiet. "Sergey, Dimitri, would you care to explain why you brought me a loan agreement designed to bankrupt me?" The two Russians exchanged glances. Sergey, who'd been doing most of the talking, attempted to maintain his composure. "Is misunderstanding. Terms are complex, yes, but standard for international arrangement." "Standard?" I couldn't help myself. "Mr. Castellano, no legitimate lending institution would structure an agreement this way. The only purpose of this complexity is to hide the true cost until it's too late to back out." Dimitri's face was flushed with anger. "You know nothing of our business, child. These are matters beyond your understanding." "Then explain it to me," I challenged, my fear beginning to give way to academic excitement. "Explain why the payment schedule in Section 8 contradicts the amortization table in Section 15. Explain why the default clauses reference economic indicators that aren't even mentioned in the original terms." Silence stretched between us as Dimitri clearly couldn't provide those explanations, because there weren't any, except for the obvious one. Logan set the tablet down carefully, his movements controlled but radiating menace. "Gentlemen, I think our business here is concluded." "Castellano," Sergei began, but Logan cut him off. "I said we're done." He stood, and the others followed suit immediately. "Marcus will see you out." As the Russians gathered their things, Dmitri leaned close to me, his voice a harsh whisper. "Little girl should be careful where she sticks her nose. Sometimes gets cut off." Before I could respond, Logan's hand was on Dmitri's chest, pushing him back with gentle but unmistakable force. "Dmitri," he said, his tone conversational, but his eyes deadly serious. "I hope you're not threatening the young lady who just saved me from making a very expensive mistake." The tension was suffocating. For a moment, I thought violence was inevitable. Then Sergei grabbed Dmitri's arm, pulling him toward the exit. "Is misunderstanding," Sergei said quickly. "We go now. Perhaps we speak again when emotions are less high." "I don't think so," Logan replied, not moving until both men had left the cafe entirely. As soon as they were gone, I sank into the nearest chair, my legs suddenly unable to support me. The adrenaline that had carried me through the confrontation was fading, leaving me shaky and overwhelmed by what I'd just done. "Jesus," Marcus muttered, running his hands through his gray hair. "Lily, do you have any idea what you just did?" I looked up at Logan, who was studying me with an expression I couldn't read. "I stopped you from being cheated out of about $80 million, I said weakly. A slow smile spread across his face, the first genuine expression I'd seen from him all afternoon. "Yes," he said, settling into the chair across from me. "You did exactly that." "How long have you been watching me?" Logan asked, his tone curious rather than accusatory. I felt heat rise to my cheeks. "I wasn't watching you exactly. I was studying, and you were just there." "For how long?" he pressed, signaling to Sarah for coffee despite the cafe's official closing time. She nodded immediately, clearly too intimidated to refuse. "Since about 2 o'clock, I admitted. I've been here most of the day working on my thesis." Marcus had taken a seat beside Logan, still looking shaken by the afternoon's events. "Your thesis?" "Economic impact of organized crime on legitimate business structures," I said, then immediately regretted the honesty when both men's expressions sharpened. Logan leaned back in his chair, a ghost of amusement flickering in his eyes. "And what conclusions have you reached?" The question felt like a test. I chose my words carefully. "That the intersection between legitimate and illegitimate enterprises creates unique financial vulnerabilities that can be exploited by both internal and external threats." "Diplomatic," Logan observed, "but not particularly specific." Sarah appeared with a coffee service that was far more elaborate than anything she'd brought me during my previous visits. Fine china instead of paper cups, actual cream in a small pitcher, sugar cubes rather than packets. She set it down with trembling hands and quickly retreated to the counter. "I study the business structures," I said, accepting the cup Logan poured for me. "Not the activities themselves, though what happened today suggests your organization faces the same financial predation risks as any large corporation." Marcus snorted. "Predation risks, that's one way to put it." "What Marcus means," Logan said smoothly, "is that our business often attracts creative attempts at financial manipulation." I thought about the document I'd just analyzed. The sophistication of what they tried suggests this wasn't their first attempt at something like this. They've refined their approach. Meaning? Meaning they've probably done this before, successfully. The complexity of those hidden clauses didn't develop overnight. Someone with serious financial expertise helped them design that structure. Logan and Marcus exchanged glances. "What kind of expertise?" I pulled my laptop closer, opening a fresh document. "May I take another look at that agreement? I want to check something." Logan slid the tablet back to me without hesitation. As I scrolled through the document again, I began noting specific phraseology and structural elements. "This is interesting," I murmured, cross-referencing with some research I'd done for my thesis. The language patterns in sections 4 through 7 match legislative text from the Dodd-Frank Act. Someone with regulatory background helped write this. "Government connections," Marcus said grimly. "Former government," I corrected. "Current officials wouldn't be this sloppy. But someone who spent years in financial regulation would know exactly how to structure an agreement that appears compliant while being fundamentally predatory." Logan was watching me work with obvious fascination. "You can determine all that from writing style?" Regulatory prose has a distinctive pattern. Specific word choices, sentence structures, even punctuation preferences. It's like a fingerprint if you know what to look for. I made another note. "Plus, the mathematical errors are strategic. Too precise to be accidental, but subtle enough that most people wouldn't catch them without serious analysis. Most people, but not you." I shrugged. "I've spent 3 years studying exactly this kind of financial manipulation. It's what happens when organized crime tries to go legitimate. They attract sophisticated predators who exploit the knowledge gaps." The words hung in the air between us. I'd essentially just described his situation with uncomfortable accuracy. "And what would you recommend?" Logan asked carefully. "To someone facing that kind of exploitation?" The question felt loaded with significance beyond the immediate situation. I considered my answer carefully. Legitimate financial expertise. Someone who understands both traditional banking and unconventional risk factors. Most financial advisors are trained for standard corporate environments. They miss vulnerabilities that are obvious to people with broader perspectives. "Broader perspectives," Logan repeated. "Like yours?" My heart rate spiked. "I'm just a student. A student who just prevented me from losing $80 million in about 10 minutes. He leaned forward slightly. "Tell me, Lily." "It is Lily, isn't it? What are your plans after graduation?" The conversation had taken a turn I wasn't prepared for. "Graduate school, probably. Maybe a doctoral program in financial economics. Expensive. Very. The understatement of the year. My student loans were already crushing, and advanced degrees would only make it worse." Marcus cleared his throat. "Logan, perhaps we should discuss—" "Marcus." The single word carried enough authority to immediately silence the older man. Logan's attention remained focused entirely on me. "What if I told you there might be an alternative to graduate school? Something more practical?" I knew I should get up and leave. Should thank them for the coffee, gather my books, and walk away from whatever this was becoming. Instead, I heard myself asking, what kind of alternative? The kind where you could apply everything you've learned in real-world situations. High-stakes environments where your expertise would be genuinely valued and appropriately compensated. The offer was as attractive as it was terrifying. "And the risks?" Logan's smile was enigmatic. "Everything worthwhile involves risk, Lily. The question is whether you're the type of person who plays it safe, or whether you're willing to step into something bigger than academic theory." Before I could respond, my phone buzzed with another text from Emma. "Cafe closes at 8. Where are you?" I glanced at the time, nearly 9:30. "I should go. My roommate is worried." "Of course." Logan stood immediately, and Marcus followed suit. "But I hope you'll consider what we've discussed." As I gathered my books, Logan pulled out his wallet and extracted a business card. Not the standard casino business card I might have expected, but something more discreet. Heavy cardstock with just a name and phone number. "If you decide you're interested in practical applications of your education," he said, handing me the card, "call me." I stared at the simple black lettering. "And if I decide I'm not?" "Then you finish your thesis, graduate with honors, and move on with your life. But I suspect someone with your analytical abilities will find academic theory less satisfying than real-world problem-solving." He wasn't wrong. I'd been feeling increasingly frustrated with the theoretical nature of my studies, longing for opportunities to apply what I'd learned in meaningful ways. "Thank you," I said, slipping the card into my textbook. "For the coffee, and for not being angry about me interrupting your meeting. Thank you for saving me from a very expensive mistake." Logan's expression grew serious. "And Lily, be careful walking home tonight. Dmitri and Sergei strike me as poor losers." The warning sent a chill down my spine. In my excitement over the intellectual challenge, I'd temporarily forgotten that these weren't just numbers on a page. They represented real conflicts with real consequences. "I'll be fine," I said, though I wasn't entirely convinced. "I'm sure you will be," Logan agreed, "but humor me." He nodded to Marcus, who immediately pulled out his phone. "Tony will drive you home. No arguments." Before I could protest, a black sedan was pulling up outside the cafe. The driver who emerged looked like he could handle any trouble that might arise. As I slid into the back seat, I caught Logan watching from the cafe window. Even from a distance, his presence was magnetic, dangerous and compelling in equal measure. The drive to my apartment was silent, giving me time to process what had just happened. I'd inserted myself into a world I only understood theoretically, helped prevent what amounted to a sophisticated financial crime, and apparently impressed one of the most powerful men in the city. Logan Castellano's business card seemed to burn against my palm, where I clutched it hidden in my textbook. The smart thing would be to throw it away, to pretend this evening had never happened. But as I climbed the stairs to my cramped studio apartment, I knew I wouldn't do that. Because for the first time in my academic career, I'd seen my education applied to something that mattered, something real and immediate and significant. And despite every logical reason to walk away, I was already wondering what it would be like to step deeper into Logan Castellano's world. 3 days passed before I found the courage to use Logan's card. 3 days of pretending to focus on finals while my mind constantly drifted back to that evening at Cafe Nero. I'd researched everything I could find about the Castellano family's legitimate businesses, telling myself it was academic curiosity rather than personal interest. The casino operations alone were fascinating from an economic perspective. Complex revenue streams, sophisticated risk management, regulatory compliance across multiple jurisdictions. It was exactly the kind of real-world application I'd been craving in my studies. Emma had noticed my distraction immediately. "You've been weird since Tuesday," she announced over breakfast on Friday morning. "Did something happen at the cafe?" "Just thesis stress," I lied, stabbing at my cereal without appetite. "Lily." Emma fixed me with the look that had made her an effective resident advisor. "I've known you for 3 years. This isn't thesis stress. This is, I met someone and I'm freaking out about it, stress." She wasn't entirely wrong, which made the conversation more difficult to navigate. "It's complicated," I said finally. "Complicated how? Married? Older? Secret criminal mastermind?" I nearly choked on my orange juice. "Why would you say that?" "Because you look guilty and terrified, which usually means you're attracted to someone completely inappropriate." Emma studied my face. "Oh my God. I was kidding about the criminal thing." "He's not a criminal," I said quickly. "He's a businessman." "A businessman who makes you look like you've seen a ghost. What kind of business?" I couldn't explain without revealing too much. "The kind that's probably outside my comfort zone." Emma's expression grew concerned. "Lily, please tell me you're not getting involved with someone dangerous." Before I could formulate a response that was both honest and reassuring, my phone rang. Unknown number? But I recognized the area code from Logan's card. "I should take this," I said, stepping into my bedroom. "Lily." Logan's voice was unmistakable, even filtered through phone speakers. "I hope I'm not calling at a bad time." "No, it's fine." I closed the door behind me, heart racing for reasons I didn't want to examine too closely. "How did you get my number?" You signed into the cafe's Wi-Fi. Their system keeps logs. There was amusement in his voice. Relax. I'm not having you surveilled. Though I was beginning to wonder if you decided to stick with academic theory after all. I've been thinking about what you said. And I took a deep breath. I'm interested. In the practical applications, I mean. But I need to understand what exactly you're proposing. Lunch, Logan said immediately. Today, if you're free. Somewhere we can discuss details without interruption. I glanced at my calendar, though I already knew my afternoon was clear. Where? I'll send a car. 1 o'clock? The casual assumption that I'd accept his terms should have irritated me. Instead, I found myself agreeing before I'd fully considered the implications. 1 o'clock, I confirmed. Excellent. And Lily, dress professionally. We'll be discussing business. The call ended before I could ask what professionally meant in his world. I stared at my closet, realizing that my wardrobe was severely lacking in options that would be appropriate for lunch with someone like Logan Castellano. Everything okay? Emma called through the door. Fine, I called back, pulling out the one decent dress I owned, a simple navy blue sheath I'd bought for job interviews. I have a lunch meeting. With mysterious businessman? With a potential employer, I corrected, which was technically true. Emma appeared in my doorway as I was struggling with the zipper. Here, let me. She helped me with the dress, then stepped back to assess the result. You look good, professional but not stuffy, though you might want to borrow my heels. Those flats aren't going to cut it if this is the kind of lunch I think it is. I didn't ask what kind of lunch she thought it was, partly because I wasn't sure I wanted to know her answer. At exactly 1 o'clock, a black car pulled up outside my building. Not the same sedan from Tuesday night, but something sleeker and more expensive. The driver who emerged was different too. Younger, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than my monthly rent. Miss Reynolds? He opened the rear door with professional courtesy. Mr. Castellano is waiting. The restaurant was in the financial district, occupying the top floor of a building that offered panoramic views of the city. The maitre d' knew my name before I could introduce myself, leading me through an elegant dining room to a private section where Logan sat reviewing documents. He looked up as I approached, and I was struck again by the intensity of his presence. Today he wore a navy suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, his dark hair perfectly styled, his attention completely focused on me as I took the seat across from him. You look lovely, he said, closing the folder he'd been reading. How were your finals? Finished yesterday, I replied, surprised he'd remembered. Results won't be posted for another week. Confident? Reasonably. I accepted the menu he handed me, though I was too nervous to focus on the options. You said you wanted to discuss practical applications? Logan smiled. Direct. I appreciate that quality. He signaled the waiter. Wine? Just water, thank you. He ordered for both of us without consulting the menu, then leaned back in his chair. Tell me, what do you know about casino revenue management? The basics: gaming revenue, hospitality services, entertainment bookings, complex regulatory environment, high-volume cash flow, significant tax implications. All accurate but incomplete. The reality is more nuanced. Logan paused as the waiter served our drinks. Gaming operations generate enormous amounts of data, player behaviors, spending patterns, risk assessments. That data has value beyond the gaming floor. I began to see where this was leading. You're talking about predictive analytics, using gambling behavior to model broader economic trends. Exactly. But we lack the expertise to properly leverage that information. Our current financial team understands gaming operations, but they don't have the analytical background to recognize deeper patterns. The waiter returned with our appetizers, something involving scallops and microgreens that looked like art on a plate. Logan continued speaking as we ate. What I'm proposing is a consulting position, Part-time initially, while you finish your degree. You'd work with our financial team to develop analytical models that help us better understand our data. It sounded fascinating and legitimate, which made me immediately suspicious. And the other aspects of your business? Logan's expression didn't change. Would remain completely separate. You'd work exclusively with the legal operations, casinos, restaurants, real estate holdings, nothing that would compromise your ethical standards or legal standing. Why me? I asked bluntly. You could hire experienced analysts, people with credentials and track records. Because experienced analysts think in conventional terms. They'd apply standard models to situations that require unconventional approaches. Logan set down his fork, giving me his full attention. Tuesday night, you saw patterns that my advisors missed completely. You understood the deception because you approached it without preconceived notions about how these things should work. The explanation made sense, but I still felt like I was missing something important. What would the compensation be? $50,000 for a 6-month trial period? If the arrangement works well for both of us, we'd discuss something more permanent. I nearly choked on my scallop. $50,000 was more than I'd make in 2 years at any entry-level position I was qualified for. That seems generous. It's fair compensation for valuable expertise. The insights you provide could be worth millions to our operations. Our main courses arrived, some kind of fish preparation that I was too distracted to properly appreciate. Logan seemed to sense my internal struggle. You're wondering what the catch is, he observed. There's always a catch. Fair enough. Logan considered his words carefully. The catch is that working with my organization means accepting certain realities about the business environment we operate in. You'd be exposed to situations and people that might make someone with your background uncomfortable. People like the Russians from Tuesday? Among others. We operate in spaces where legitimate business intersects with less legitimate activities. Not because we choose to, but because the nature of our industry makes it inevitable. I thought about what I'd researched over the past few days. The casino industry did exist in a gray area, attracting both legitimate investors and more questionable financial backing. Would I be safe? Logan's expression grew serious. Completely. You'd work from secure locations, interact only with vetted personnel, and have protection whenever necessary. Your safety would be my highest priority. The intensity in his voice when he spoke about protecting me sent an unexpected flutter through my chest. I pushed the feeling aside, trying to focus on the practical considerations. I'd want to maintain my academic commitments. Graduation, thesis defense, everything. Of course, this position would be structured around your academic schedule. I stared out the restaurant's windows at the city sprawling below us. 6 months ago, I'd been worried about affording groceries. Now I was being offered more money than I'd ever imagined, to do work that genuinely excited me, by a man who was simultaneously attractive and terrifying. I need some time to think about it, I said finally. How much time? Until Monday? Logan nodded. Monday it is. He handed me another business card, this one with an address printed below his contact information. If you decide yes, come to this location Monday morning at 9. If you decide no, I'll understand completely and wish you well with your academic pursuits. As we finished lunch, the conversation shifted to safer topics. My studies, his thoughts on economic policy, neutral subjects that revealed his sharp intelligence without venturing into dangerous territory. By the time we left the restaurant, I felt more comfortable with him than I had any right to. The car ride back to my apartment was quiet, giving me time to process everything. Logan's offer was exactly what I'd been hoping for. Meaningful work that would utilize my education in real-world applications. The compensation was life-changing. The only complication was the man making the offer, and the world he represented. As the car pulled away from my building, I realized I'd already made my decision. I just needed the weekend to convince myself it was the right one. Monday morning found me standing outside a gleaming office building in the financial district at exactly 8:55, wearing my best professional outfit and carrying a leather portfolio I'd bought specifically for the occasion. The address on Logan's card led to the 32nd floor, where elegant brass letters announced Castellano Holdings, beside frosted glass doors. The receptionist, a woman in her 40s with perfectly styled auburn hair, smiled warmly as I approached. "Miss Reynolds, I presume? Mr. Castellano is expecting you." I was escorted through a sophisticated office environment that could have belonged to any high-end financial firm. Modern furniture, original artwork, floor-to-ceiling windows offering spectacular city views. Whatever I'd been expecting from a mob boss's headquarters, this wasn't it. Logan's office occupied a corner of the building, with windows facing both the harbor and the downtown core. He was on the phone when I arrived, gesturing for me to take a seat while he finished his conversation. "No, I want the quarterly projections updated before the board meeting," he was saying. "If the Riverside property isn't performing to expectations, we need to understand why before we commit additional resources." He hung up and turned his attention to me, his expression brightening. "Lily, I'm glad you decided to join us." "Thank you for the opportunity," I replied, suddenly nervous despite my preparation. "Marcus will show you around, introduce you to the team. But first, I wanted to go over the basics." Logan handed me a folder. Employment contract, non-disclosure agreement, basic security protocols. Take your time reviewing everything. The contract was straightforward, though the salary figure still seemed surreal. The NDA was more comprehensive than I'd expected, covering not just proprietary business information, but also personnel matters and operational procedures. The security protocols were eye-opening: restrictions on discussing work outside the office, requirements to vary my daily routines, and procedures for reporting any unusual contact or surveillance. "This is quite detailed," I observed, looking up from the documents. "Necessary precautions," Logan replied. "Our business attracts attention from competitors, regulators, and occasionally law enforcement. We protect our people by maintaining strict information security." I signed the papers, though the weight of what I was committing to felt heavier with each signature. Logan collected the documents and led me out of his office to meet the rest of the team. Marcus, whom I recognized from the cafe, managed the overall financial operations. Despite his nervous demeanor during the Russian meeting, he proved to be sharp and experienced, with decades of experience in complex business environments. "Lily will be working with you on the analytical projects we discussed," Logan explained. "Give her whatever resources she needs." The rest of the financial team consisted of 4 other professionals: Elena, a CPA who handled compliance and reporting; David, who managed the casino revenue streams; Sarah, who worked on the real estate portfolios; and James, a former banking executive who oversaw investment strategies. All of them were clearly legitimate financial professionals, though I sensed an underlying tension that went beyond normal workplace dynamics. They were friendly but careful, welcoming but watchful. It was like being introduced to a family that had learned to be perpetually cautious. "Your primary project," Marcus explained as he showed me to my new office, a space larger and better appointed than any I'd ever imagined having, "is developing predictive models for customer behavior across our gaming operations." The work was exactly what Logan had described: fascinating, complex, and completely legitimate. I spent the morning reviewing datasets that contained millions of individual transactions, looking for patterns that could help optimize everything from marketing campaigns to facility layouts. By lunch, I was completely absorbed in the analysis. The data revealed intricate behavioral patterns that conventional wisdom about gambling would never predict. Players with certain demographic profiles consistently showed loyalty patterns that contradicted industry assumptions. Spending behaviors varied in ways that suggested opportunities for more targeted service offerings. "This is incredible," I told Marcus as we reviewed my preliminary findings. You could revolutionize customer retention with these insights. That's exactly what Logan hoped you'd say, Marcus replied, though something in his expression suggested complexity beyond simple business optimization. The afternoon brought my first glimpse of the other side of Castellano Holdings. I was working late in my office when voices from the hallway caught my attention. Urgent, tense conversations in what sounded like Italian. Through my partially open door, I saw men in expensive suits moving past, with the kind of purposeful urgency that suggested crisis management. Elena appeared in my doorway a few minutes later. "Lily, you should probably head home. The evening shift can be busier than what you're used to." I wanted to ask what she meant, but her expression discouraged questions. I gathered my things and left through the main entrance, noticing for the first time the additional security personnel who appeared as daylight faded. The pattern continued throughout my first week. Days filled with legitimate, fascinating work analyzing casino operations and revenue optimization. Evenings when the office atmosphere shifted subtly, when conversations switched to Italian, when people I didn't recognize came and went through private entrances. Logan checked on my progress daily, always professional but with an underlying intensity that made our interactions feel charged with unspoken possibilities. He was genuinely interested in my analytical findings, asking probing questions that revealed his own sharp business instincts. The customer loyalty program could be restructured based on these behavioral patterns, I explained during one of our meetings, showing him charts I'd developed. Instead of uniform rewards, we could offer personalized incentives that actually match spending psychology. Implementation timeline? 6 weeks for a pilot program, assuming we can get IT support for the necessary system modifications. Logan nodded, making notes. Done. What else? His immediate approval of significant expenditures still surprised me. In my previous jobs, any new initiative required endless approvals and justifications. Here, Logan seemed to trust my expertise completely. The real estate portfolio has some interesting opportunities too, I continued. The property usage data suggests several locations are underutilized in ways that could generate additional revenue streams. Such as? I pulled up another presentation. The Riverside property, for example. Gaming revenue is below projections, but foot traffic data shows high volume during business hours. It's positioned to serve the financial district, but the current entertainment offerings target evening clientele. Logan studied the charts I'd created. You're suggesting repositioning for business lunches and after-work events. Exactly. Partner with local corporations for private events. Modify the restaurant service to accommodate business meetings. Maybe add conference facilities. The location could generate significant daytime revenue that doesn't cannibalize evening gaming operations. Brilliant, Logan said, and the approval in his voice sent warmth through me that had nothing to do with professional satisfaction. How did you develop these insights so quickly? The data tells stories if you know how to listen, I replied. Most analysis focuses on gaming revenue because that's the primary business model, but customer behavior reveals opportunities that pure revenue analysis misses. Logan was quiet for a moment, studying me with an expression I couldn't read. You're wasted in academic settings, Lily. This kind of thinking requires real-world application. The comment echoed thoughts I'd been having myself. My work at Castellano Holdings was more engaging than anything I'd encountered in my academic program. The problems were immediate, the solutions had real impact, and the intellectual challenges were constantly evolving. I've been thinking the same thing, I admitted. Good. Logan closed the folder containing my reports. Because I have a proposition for you. Before he could continue, his phone rang. He glanced at the caller ID and his expression hardened immediately. I need to take this, he said, answering the call. Dmitri, how unexpected. Even hearing the name sent a chill through me. The Russian from the cafe, whose loan scheme I'd helped expose. Logan's side of the conversation was brief and tense, conducted in a mixture of English and what sounded like Russian. When he hung up, his jaw was tight with anger. "Problem?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to know the answer. "The Russians want a meeting. They claim to have a new proposal, something that addresses the concerns you raised about their previous offer." Fear flickered through me. "You're not seriously considering meeting with them again?" Logan's expression softened slightly at my obvious concern. "Not considering, no. But I need to understand what they're planning. Intelligence gathering. That sounds dangerous." "Everything worthwhile involves some danger," Logan replied, echoing what he'd said at the cafe. "But this affects you too, Lily. They specifically requested that you be present." My blood ran cold. "What? Why?" "They want to demonstrate that their new proposal addresses the mathematical issues you identified. They're positioning it as a professional courtesy, bringing in the expert who caught their mistakes. The request felt wrong on every level. I'm not going." "I wouldn't ask you to," Logan said immediately. "But I wanted you to know. They're aware of your involvement, which means they're aware of you personally. Security around you will be increased accordingly." The casual mention of increased security drove home a reality I'd been trying to ignore. Working for Logan meant being connected to conflicts that extended far beyond normal business disputes. What kind of increased security? Discreet surveillance, modified routines, additional protection when necessary. Nothing that should interfere with your daily life, but enough to ensure your safety. I stared out Logan's office windows at the city beyond, suddenly seeing it differently. Somewhere out there, dangerous people were making plans that involved me personally. The academic world I'd inhabited just weeks ago felt impossibly distant. "I should go home," I said finally. "Of course." Logan stood immediately. "I'll have Tony drive you." As I gathered my things, Logan caught my arm gently. "Lily, I want you to know that your safety is my highest priority. Whatever happens with the Russians or anyone else, you're under my protection now." The possessiveness in his voice should have alarmed me. Instead, it sent an unexpected thrill through me that I wasn't ready to examine. On the drive home, I tried to process how quickly my life had changed. 3 weeks ago, I'd been a struggling student worried about graduation and student loans. Now I was earning more money than I'd ever imagined, doing work I genuinely loved, and apparently under the protection of one of the most powerful men in the city. The smart thing would be to quit, to return to my safe, predictable academic world before I got in any deeper. But as I looked at the preliminary analyses I'd developed, at the real impact my work was having, I knew I wouldn't do that. I was already in deeper than was safe or sensible. And despite every logical reason to be terrified, I was beginning to think that might be exactly where I wanted to be. The crisis came on a Thursday afternoon, exactly 3 weeks after I'd started working for Castellano Holdings. I was deep in analysis of the Q3 revenue reports when urgent voices erupted from Logan's office. Through my partially open door, I could see Marcus rushing past with a tablet, his face grave with concern. Elena appeared in my doorway moments later. "Lily, we need you in the conference room, now." The tone brooked no argument. I saved my work and followed her down the hall to a room I'd never entered before. Larger than Logan's office, with a massive table surrounded by leather chairs and wall-mounted screens displaying what appeared to be financial data and surveillance feeds. Logan stood at the head of the table, his usual composed demeanor replaced by barely controlled intensity. Marcus sat to his right, typing rapidly on a laptop. 3 other men I didn't recognize occupied chairs along the far side. Older, harder-looking individuals who radiated the same dangerous authority as Logan himself. "Lily," Logan said as I entered, "we have a situation that requires your expertise." On the main screen was a document I recognized immediately. The same type of complex loan agreement the Russians had tried to present weeks ago. But this version was different, more sophisticated, with the obvious traps I'd identified previously removed. "They've revised their proposal," Marcus explained, gesturing to the screen. "Eliminated the compound interest deceptions, restructured the payment schedules, removed the hidden escalation clauses." I studied the document, my trained eye automatically analyzing the terms and conditions. "It looks legitimate," I said slowly. "The interest rate is reasonable. The payment structure is standard. The default conditions are typical for this type of agreement." "That's what worries me," Logan replied. 3 weeks ago, they tried to cheat me out of $80 million. Now they're offering essentially the same deal with fair terms. Why? One of the unfamiliar men spoke up, his accent suggesting Italian origins. "Because they need the money more than they need the profit. Something's pressuring them." "Or it's a trap," added another. "Get you to accept reasonable terms, then alter the agreement after signing." I examined the document more carefully, looking for the kind of subtle manipulations I'd learned to identify. "The structure is clean," I said after several minutes. "If this is a trap, it's not a financial one." Logan turned to me, his gray eyes intense. Meaning the danger isn't in the loan terms themselves. If they're planning something, it would have to be external to the agreement. Something that happens after you accept, not something hidden in the contract. Marcus pulled up another screen. "The meeting is scheduled for tonight. Neutral location, public venue. The Harbor View Hotel's private dining room." "Too public for violence," one of the men observed. "But perfect for witnesses," Logan replied grimly. "If they're planning to set me up for something, a public location with security cameras would be ideal." I felt sick as the implications became clear. "You think they're trying to frame you for something?" "It's a possibility we have to consider," Logan said. "The FBI has been investigating our operations for months. If the Russians could provide them with evidence of illegal activity, real or fabricated, it would solve several problems simultaneously." The casual mention of FBI investigation drove home how completely I'd entered a world I didn't understand. "What kind of evidence?" "Video of an apparent arms deal, drug transaction, bribery, anything that could be interpreted as criminal activity by someone not present for the actual conversation." Marcus nodded grimly. "They propose something legitimate. We discuss it normally, but their recording makes it sound like we're agreeing to something illegal." I stared at the financial agreement on the screen, understanding now that the numbers were irrelevant. This wasn't about money. It was about destroying Logan's organization through legal prosecution. "So you don't take the meeting," I said. "Send representatives. Negotiate through intermediaries." "Already tried," Logan replied. "They're insisting on my personal attendance, claiming it's a matter of respect and trust." "And if you don't go," one of the older men answered, "then they interpret it as weakness. Other families start testing boundaries, seeing what they can get away with. We show weakness once, we spend the next 5 years fighting challenges." Logan moved to the windows, staring out at the city. "The alternative is walking into what's probably a trap, hoping we can control the situation enough to avoid serious consequences." I found myself speaking before I'd fully formed the thought. What if there was a third option? Every head in the room turned toward me. Logan's expression was particularly intense. "Explain," he said. I took a deep breath, knowing I was about to cross a line from which there would be no return. What if you took someone with you who could recognize and counter any manipulation in real time? Someone whose presence would change the dynamic enough to disrupt whatever they're planning. "You mean you," Logan said quietly. "I mean someone with financial expertise who could serve as an independent witness to what's actually discussed. If they're planning to manipulate the recording or testimony later, having a credible third party present would complicate their strategy." Marcus was already shaking his head. "Too dangerous. If something goes wrong..." "If something goes wrong, I'm the least threatening person in the room," I interrupted. "I'm a student, An analyst, someone with no criminal background and no reason to lie about what happens. Logan continued staring out the window, considering. It would change the meeting dynamic significantly. Instead of a negotiation between criminals, it becomes a business consultation with proper documentation. Exactly. And if they try to spring some kind of trap, my presence as an uninvolved third party would make it much harder to justify legally. One of the older men spoke up. The girl makes sense, but if we bring her, we're responsible for her safety. Completely responsible, Logan agreed, turning back to face me. Lily, you need to understand what you're volunteering for. These people have already threatened you once. Putting yourself in a room with them again, even with protection, involves real risk. I thought about my life 3 weeks ago, struggling with student loans, worried about finding employment after graduation, spending endless hours on theoretical problems that would never impact anything real. Then I looked around this room, at these powerful men treating my opinion as genuinely valuable, discussing problems where my expertise could make the difference between success and disaster. I understand the risk, I said. I'm willing to accept it. Logan studied me for a long moment. This isn't academic analysis, Lily. This is real-world consequences. If you're there and something goes wrong, you could be charged with conspiracy, racketeering, any number of federal crimes just for being present. Or I could prevent those charges by ensuring there's an accurate record of what actually happens. Marcus looked between Logan and me, clearly uncomfortable with the direction of the conversation. Logan, even if she's willing, bringing a civilian into this. I'm not a civilian anymore, I interrupted, surprising myself with the vehemence in my voice. I work for this organization. These people have threatened me personally. Whatever happens tonight affects my future too. The room fell silent. Logan's expression was unreadable as he considered my words. All right, he said finally. But with conditions. You stay close to me at all times. You speak only when directly addressed. If I tell you to leave, you leave immediately without argument. And if anything goes wrong, anything at all, you do exactly what I tell you to do. Agreed. Marcus was shaking his head. This is insane, Logan. If anything happens to her, nothing will happen to her, Logan said, his voice carrying absolute authority. I give you my word. The certainty in his tone sent warmth through me that had nothing to do with professional confidence. Logan Castellano's word, apparently, was something these dangerous men considered unbreakable. 3 hours later, I found myself in the back of an armored sedan, wearing a conservative black dress that Elena had somehow procured in my exact size, heading toward what might be the most dangerous evening of my life. Logan sat beside me, immaculate in a charcoal suit, reviewing security protocols with the team via encrypted phone. 2 other cars flanked us, one ahead, one behind, carrying additional protection I tried not to think about too specifically. Having second thoughts? Logan asked as we approached the Harborview Hotel. Third and fourth thoughts, I admitted. But I'm still here. He reached over and took my hand, his thumb tracing reassuring circles across my knuckles. You don't have to prove anything, Lily. Not to me, not to anyone. The simple contact sent electricity up my arm. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm trying to do what's right. Logan's smile was soft with an emotion I couldn't identify. That's exactly why you don't belong in this world. And exactly why this world needs people like me in it, I replied. As our car pulled into the hotel's circular drive, Logan squeezed my hand once more. Stay close, he murmured. And remember, whatever happens in there, you're under my protection. Walking into that hotel, my hand tucked securely in the crook of Logan's arm, I realized I'd made my choice weeks ago in a cafe when I'd chosen to speak up instead of staying silent. Everything since then had been an inevitable progression toward this moment, toward becoming part of something larger and more dangerous than anything I'd ever imagined. The Russians were waiting in the private dining room, their expressions shifting from confident to confused as they registered my presence beside Logan. Dimitri's eyes narrowed with recognition and poorly concealed anger. "Gentlemen," Logan said, his voice carrying the easy authority of someone completely in control. "I believe you remember my financial consultant, Dr. Reynolds." The title was a fabrication. I wouldn't have my doctorate for another 2 years. But the Russians couldn't know that, and the implication that I was there in an official capacity clearly disrupted whatever they'd planned. As we took our seats at the elegantly appointed table, I caught Logan's subtle smile. Whatever trap the Russians had prepared, bringing me had already begun to dismantle it. The next 2 hours would determine not just the success of their plan, but the entire trajectory of my future. I was no longer a student observing from the sidelines. I was Dr. Lily Reynolds, financial consultant to the Castellano family, and I was exactly where I belonged.